Good morning. Welcome to Garden Valley. Thank you for coming. This is the day the Lord's made. We rejoice and we're glad in it. And welcome home. I have spoke on this topic today numerous times, but not from this angle. You're going to recognize the story immediately, and so your handout is kind of like a commentary. I just broke it down verse by verse and kind of what I see in that verse, and I'm kind of hoping that you can take this home and use it like as a devotional maybe, where you can take it home, read it in your Bible, and kind of pray about it. And we know that's the first thing you do when you study the Bible is, what James chapter 1, if you lack wisdom, ask God and He'll give it to you. So as we go through this today, my prayer is that you will have a little different perspective, because this is a war between faith and fear, okay? And fear can be incredibly crippling, okay? Fear is, they're a battle, all right? In the same heart, it's like you can't have faith and fear at the same time. I gave you 2 Timothy 1:7. God hasn't given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. So as you go through this, and I want you to recognize that, and this is from my own experience, as I go through my day, there are things that I may have tremendous faith on, and then I'll encounter something I'm insecure about, or something I'm struggling with, or something that intimidates me, and all of a sudden it's like this little switch. All of a sudden, the great faith that I've been feeling all strong about, and all of a sudden I'll have this fear thing, and so all of a sudden I find myself, following Peter's steps. So as we go through this, I'm hoping that you'll recognize yourself in here somewhere. So the first verse is Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. It says, immediately after this, and when you see that, you have to go back to the previous chapter and keep reading to get the context of what's going on. We're talking about Jesus feeding the 5,000, and that's important because now the disciples just participated in this miracle where Jesus is feeding 5,000. And so now what happens? So it says Jesus insisted. Now I wanted you to mark this in your mind, because immediately after feeding the 5,000, the ministry's going great. There are people, they're being drawn to Jesus, and the multitudes are coming out, and great things are happening. It's very exciting. And so what? It said now all of a sudden Jesus insists, he commands them, that the disciples get back on the boat and cross to the other side of the lake, and he's going to send everybody else home, right? So as he's sending people home, he wants his disciples in the boat heading to the other side. I just gave you a couple thoughts. One of them is why. Why would Jesus want his disciples out of that area? Why? Because the disciples would have never have chosen to be in a storm. All right? If they're going to be in this storm and they're going to go through what Jesus wants them to go through, he's going to build their faith. He's going to show himself to them, and they are going to grow spiritually and mature through this, but they must go through the storm. Now, I could frankly spend the rest of the afternoon talking about storms that I recognize God allowed me to go through to move me out of a place of comfort. The disciples had just fed 5,000 people. Jesus did this amazing miracle. They were in their comfort zone. Some amazing things are happening, and we're excited, and there's just a lot of... And all of a sudden, Jesus said, enough of that. We've had the mountaintop experience, and now we're going to go into a storm. I remember...
lesson, then the test.
Oh, yeah, there's always a test after a lesson, isn't there? Oh, man. I remember 100 years ago, I was a jail commander in Colville, and I remember I was pretty comfortable. I could do the job, and I had some staff that I had hired and trained, and it was going good. And actually, I liked working for Craig, and there were a lot of things going very well. And then I had an unhappy customer, and he broke my back. That was very rude, very thoughtless of him. Broke my back, and I ended up having some spinal fusion surgeries and such forth. And the problem is you can't keep doing that kind of job if you're crippled. And so I lost my career. To me, that was a storm. I had a family I was supporting. I had bills, and so all of a sudden I went from being very secure, being in my comfort zone, to going through a storm. And so just to make the storm complete, labor and industries absolutely were positive that I got hurt at work. There was no doubt, and I was like witnesses and all this, so there was no doubt, except they didn't want to pay for it. And so for 2 years, I was just kind of half doing my job and when I could, and half being at home, and they would bring my job to me. And so I'd actually, pretty much lay in bed being the jail commander. And so I'm actually working from home, and 2 years, and my sciatica starts dying, and it's not going well. This is an excruciating time. And the funny part is, Labor and Industries didn't deny it; they just didn't say nothing. And so I ended up hiring an attorney, and hired him. God brought me a great attorney. He was amazing. And so Todd, he actually had to go to court to force Ellen and I to do the surgery to fix my back to where I could function again. And so I remember they're getting ready to wheel me into surgery for this fusion process. And I remember the surgeon told me, he says, they still haven't approved this surgery. But he says, I made it very clear to them in a letter that you will have no life if we don't do this surgery. So he wheeled me in and operated on me without approval. And I guess the Labor and Industry figured they'd been beat by that point because they approved it. But my point is, all of a sudden I was in a storm. For me, I was moved out of my comfort zone. For me, I was in a place where I was, all of a sudden, now what am I going to do? I mean, the days of fighting bad guys are kind of over now. And so now, what is going to be the next step in my career? And I remember my wife at this point. God brings you a breath of fresh air sometimes when you least expect it. And I admit I was dealing with a lot of depression stuff, and all of a sudden, the things that I was very secure in and comfort in was gone. And so I remember Michelle come home, and she handed me a piece of paper. And she said, I was listening to the radio, and she said, there's a college in Spokane called Moody, and she says, I think you should check it out. Well, I knew who Moody was. I had been professors in Chicago that taught at Moody. And come to find out, there's a satellite Bible college in Spokane called Moody Bible Institute, and I spent the next 6 years going to Moody in Spokane. And Michelle had no idea who they were. All she knew was on the radio, they advertised the Bible college, and she just jotted down the name and how to get a hold of them, and that transformed. I had to go through a storm before I could learn the lesson. I had to go through the storm because God knew that left to myself, I would have remained in my comfort zone. God had to move me out of my comfort zone, and He knows how hard-headed I am, and He knew the only way to get me out of my comfort zone was to break me. And so He broke me, did a fine job of that. And so, another thing I gave you on the little handout there under the same topic, obeying God does not prevent trouble. Oh man, yeah, that makes selling people on Christianity, kind of a tough point. But think about this, not long after this, all of a sudden we've got massive persecution. And if you ever get bored, you should Google what happened to each one of the apostles. How did each one of the apostles die? They were martyred for their faith. Just because you're a Christian does not mean you're not going to go through the storms of life, all right?
John.
Pardon me?
Yeah, John.
Yeah. John actually was fascinating because, remember, Jesus dying on the cross, and basically he handed off care of his mother to John. And so John, he is allowed to not be martyred, but the history shows that at one point they tried to kill him by pouring boiling oil on him, and he had 2 or 3 different attempts on his life, and it wasn't that he got away unscathed, all right? So even John, he didn't have an easy time of it. So let's go to the next verse, verse 23. So their disciples are in a boat crossing out in the middle of this storm, and Jesus sent the people home, and he went up into a mountain. By the way, I love this. This is so precious. So Jesus sent the people home, the multitudes home. He's like, all right, this is all the free show you're going to get. You're going to have to go home now. So he went up into the hills by himself to pray, and night fell while he was there alone. Think about this. The disciples are in a boat, in a storm. Their lives are being threatened. And where was Jesus? Jesus was praying for them. Isn't that awesome? Jesus is alone in a mountain, and he's praying for them. And I just gave you a couple thoughts I had as I was doing this. One, Jesus needed to be alone in prayer with his Father. So the question is this: do I have a priority in my life to be alone in prayer with Jesus? Is there a time in my schedule? And by the way, I think schedule is important. If I don't start out my day in prayer, there's a good chance that I'm going to go the whole day with a flat tire. If I don't start out my day in prayer, thank you.
I cannot focus with him there.
Then you did good. You just go wild. Yes. So, you just control. Randy was doing it earlier up here. Yeah. There's no short. Every Sunday morning I come in here and I vacuum because there's just critters all over. So why did Jesus need to get alone in prayer? Why did Jesus need to be alone? Because Jesus refused to live on yesterday's blessing. Yesterday, what happened? He just got done feeding the 5,000. So we have a mountaintop experience. We have all these things. He should have been just riding high on adrenaline. Riding high on this incredible blessing. The things that God had been doing, the Father had been doing through His Son was just remarkable. And so what? Now Jesus goes into why? Because He wants to prepare Himself. Jesus wants to prepare His heart for whatever He's about to face. Okay? And if you study the life of Jesus, whenever He's going to if He's going to select disciples, if He's going to go into a spiritual battle, He always goes apart to pray. I'm going to tell you another story because I can. I went to Bible college in Chicago, went to seminary in Chicago, and while I was there, I was a night manager of a Pizza Hut, of all things. And that did great for my diabetes. And so I was night manager of the Pizza Hut, and I come home, and I may have been a little overweight, and I may have been a little out of shape, and I didn't feel good. So my dad made me go see Dr. Herman in Colville, and Dr. Herman, who was a very devout Lutheran, if I remember right. And I remember Doc Herman sat me down, he says, "So you think you're smarter than Jesus?" I said, "I have no clue where you're going with this." And he said, "Well, Jesus went apart into a mountain to pray." He said, "Jesus took care of Himself. Why don't you take care of yourself?" He says, "You think you can just run 24/7 without any sleep, without eating healthy, without taking care of yourself?" He says, "Jesus didn't do that." And I remember Dr. Herman, I was, 19 years old, I think, 20 when he had this conversation. 20 years old, and to this day, I remember the rebuke that I got from my physician because I was not taking time out of my day to pray. And I think a lot of the lessons that I learned in that period of time in my life was the importance of spending time alone with God, right? Keep going, verse 24. "Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen and they were fighting heavy seas." Oh man. I know none of you have experienced this where you're struggling, you're exhausted, you're in fear, everything is against you. And trust me, the middle is the hardest place to be, isn't it? When you're out in the middle of a storm, and now all of a sudden, what are you going to do? Where are you going to reach? And all of a sudden, remember this, God shows up when you get to the end of your rope. When you get to the end of your rope and you honestly have no idea what you're going to do next, God shows up. Yeah, with God, nothing's impossible. But sometimes He lets me thrash around and do everything I can think of just so when He shows up, He gets the credit. There's going to be no doubt who gets the credit when this happens. So I gave the middle's the hardest because there's no control. You're not making progress. These guys are fishermen and they're rowing with all their heart and they're doing their very best trying to get out of the storm, and they're stuck in the middle of this. And the middle, and by the way, I think the middle is incredibly helpful in your spiritual growth. Okay, get this. When you are in the middle of a battle, when you are in the middle, what happens? It will expose your limits. It will expose where your faith is. It will expose what you think about Jesus. When you're in the middle of a battle, what you believe about Jesus will come to light. Because are you turning to prayer? What are you doing? Are you just, is a sense of anxiety and angst? I mean, are you being overwhelmed by this? So it reveals where your dependence is, all right? In verse 25, about 3 in the morning, somewhere between 3 and 6, about 3 in the morning, Jesus came toward them walking on the water. And I gave you just a note. God shows up when it's darkest. When I am most helpless, God shows up. Don't miss this. When I'm at a point where I have absolutely no idea where to turn, nowhere to go, God shows up. When I was in the Army, there was a day, I've been in Central America about 2 years, and things were getting really stupid, for lack of a better term. We had numerous guys that committed suicide, and morale was, it was bad. Getting ready for the invasion of Panama, and it was not going well, let's just say. And I remember we were all struggling with depression. Every single one of us. We're just trying to keep our boots pointed in the same direction every day. And I remember I was sitting on the, I'll even tell you the whole story, I got a minute. When you go to a place called Fort Sherman, it's a jungle operation training center it's on the Atlantic. It goes out into the Atlantic, it's all jungle, really tiny little special forces base. The only people there are dependents, because the special forces guys are always going. And so it's just their dependents, and so we're out there, we're doing security for them, and I found that I could take my old Vietnam era Army Jeep, and when the tide goes down, I could drive my Jeep out on the coral, way out like a mile into the ocean, into the Atlantic, and you look around, there's a lighthouse. Then you could kind of see it way off in the distance, and you're sitting in the middle of the Atlantic here in your Jeep, and you're sitting on the hood, kind of leaning back on the windshield, and you could just sit there and watch the fish jump, and it was interesting. I mean, it was something you don't get to do every day. And I remember sitting there, every time I did this, I kept thinking, I wonder if this dumb thing's gonna start. You know, this was getting on there, they were kind of famous for not running, and I'm pretty sure I couldn't push it a mile over coral. But anyway, so I remember sitting there, and I promise, true story, I'm sitting there, and by the way, unless you see the stars in that environment, I mean, they're just endless. There's absolutely no light pollution, there's no mountains, there's nothing, it's just, the whole world is just this beautiful starscape. And I remember I patted my pocket, and the Gideons, when you got out of training, I don't know, some training I went to, the Gideons gave us New Testaments. And I remember I had this little camouflage New Testament crammed in my pocket. Yeah, we got them. And I remember sitting on the hood of my Jeep, and I'm holding that New Testament, and I couldn't read it because it was dark out there. But I remember thinking about I had been to seminary. I had 4 years of seminary, and I remember sitting on the Jeep, and all of a sudden the Spirit of God starts nudging me with what I had been learned, what I had been taught. He was starting to nudge me. He was starting to reinforce. But I was not open to listen to the Spirit of God until I was in a place where I was in the middle of a storm with absolutely no idea how it was going to turn out, right? So what else happened? So God shows up, and Jesus came in when they had nothing left. In verse 26, when the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified, and in their fear they cried out, "It's a ghost." Yeah, well, fear distorts our vision. Fear misreads God's presence, and fear turns miracles into threats. Now, fear. Now, there have been times in my life when I was afraid. I'm not going to make it sound anything different than that. Some of the most terrifying moments, I had a dear friend. He was a sergeant that worked for me in the sheriff's office, and one night, him and his family they were going to go to see a movie at the Colville Theater, and their son didn't want to go. He was out of high school, probably 18, 19 years old. Didn't want to go, didn't feel good, laid down. And so my friend and his family went to see the movie, went to see Transformers. And so they come home, and when they got home, he's not moving. He's unconscious. And so they go in and check on him, and they call an ambulance. He's got leukemia, and he never did regain consciousness. So they flew him to Spokane, and they put him in Holy Family. And I remember a sense of the storm in that poor family. They were exhausted. They weren't sleeping. They were every aspect of it. They didn't see it coming, and they felt they missed something. And one morning I woke up. It was about 2 or 3 weeks into this. I woke up and I told Michelle, I said, "We got to go to see Wayne. We got to go to Spokane." So we loaded up. We drove to Holy Family. We walked in the room, and as we walked into the bay where he was at, the doctor was getting ready to pull the plug. I mean, it was like that day. I mean, they were within 10 minutes of where they were going to pull the life support system. And I remember, you talk about a storm of life. And that, my friends, in that moment, talk about fear, talk about angst, talk about where things get real. All of a sudden, what do you believe about Jesus? And my friend's son passed away. And I remember I did his funeral in Kettle Falls. And okay, now I'm just telling stories. You know what I remember about that funeral? It's been a few years ago. his favorite music was the Black Eyed Peas. So all the music in the funeral was the Black Eyed. So until you've been in a church playing the Black Eyed Peas, you haven't actually been a pastor. So, that was, not one of my prouder moments. So anyway, flip your little paper over. Yes. Verse 27, and Jesus spoke to them at once, don't be afraid. Now when you go through your Bible, but one of the consistent things is when an angel shows up, when Jesus shows up, what is the first thing that's always being said? Don't be afraid. Take courage. I'm here. I just gave you 3 life-changing sentences. It's in that little tiny verse, 27. If you write in your Bible, you might hang on to this. This is for that moment when you're afraid, that moment when you don't understand what's going on. I hate it when I'm waiting for an answer. I hate it when I don't know what's going on. I don't know what to say. 3 life-changing sentences in that little tiny verse. 1, don't be afraid. Fear is not your master. You do not have to let fear reign in your heart. You have choices. What? He says, take courage. He says, okay, you don't have to be afraid. So why? Because the decision you're going to have to make is, are you going to trust God or are you going to trust the fear? And the third one, he said, I'm here. That is the presence of Jesus, the presence of God. Where can you go where you are not in the presence of the Almighty? You can't escape His presence. And so here he says, listen, don't be afraid. I know you're scared. But you need to take courage. You don't have to be afraid because you need to make a decision to trust me. Trust who I am. Trust, and listen, if you struggle with this, the problem is you don't understand exactly who Jesus is. The more you get to know Him, the more that you know that you can trust Him, all right? He said, listen, I am here. You are in my presence. I'm the great I am, and that's a whole nother sermon. But you are in the presence of Jesus. He is reigning, and He has the power to deliver. But there is a reason that you're there. He is allowing you to go through this storm to refine your faith, to develop spiritual maturity, to teach you a lesson, to prepare you for a battle that's upcoming. There is something that He is getting ready to teach you, and you should not miss this, okay? That little verse 27 is incredibly powerful. That's a whole sermon all unto itself. Verse 28, then Peter called him and said, Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you walking on the water. And I love this. I love it because Peter's basically saying, listen, if it's really you, Jesus, I will go anywhere that you're at. I will follow you to the end of the earth. I'll follow you across the water. You tell me where you want me to be, and that's where I'll be. And you notice he was asking for a word. All he wanted to hear was Jesus say, come. He wasn't looking for a guarantee. He didn't want Jesus to promise he wasn't going to get his Birkenstocks wet if he gets out of the boat, right? He's not looking for safety here. He's not looking for promises. All he says is, I want to hear Jesus say, come, and I'm out of the boat. So Peter, he didn't get out of the boat to walk on the water. Peter got out of the boat because he wanted to get close to Jesus. Is that cool? Yeah. I love that. Peter wanted, whatever there was between him and Jesus, he did not see that as an obstacle. He wanted to be close to Jesus. So then I asked myself, what is the gap between me and Jesus today? What is there, and by the way, Communion Sunday, this always bangs away on my heart. What is there happening in my life that is slowing down my relationship with Jesus? What is making me question who Jesus is? What is there that is inhibiting my faith? Why is my faith not growing? Is my faith stronger today than it was last year at this time? I mean, have I grown spiritually? Have I matured spiritually? So verse 29, Jesus just says, yeah, come on. And so Jesus said, and so Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. Man, I think this is an incredibly practical, insightful lesson. Because here you see where Jesus said, come, and Peter was what? Peter was trusting the Word of God. Peter was trusting, Jesus said, come, and He is not going to put me in a situation that is beyond His control. Jesus is not going to call me into a position where He can't control what's happening to me. I trust Him. My faith, so what? Now His faith is rising up to where, I put faith rose up where faith once ruled. It should be fear once ruled, right? In fear, he was in a storm, he was afraid, and Jesus said, come, and that word from God was enough. So at Jesus' voice, at Jesus' command to come, the impossible became the possible. All of a sudden, what? He hopped out of the boat. So when I look at these guys, and by the way, I read a story one time about all these guys in the boat, and it's a fable, They see Jesus walking on the water, and the story is each excuse as to why each one of these guys didn't jump out of the boat and go with Peter, right? Each one of them are like, well, I just got new sandals. I'm not going to get out of the boat, they're going to get wet, they're going to get ruined, the wife I'll never hear the end of it. And so, another guy's like, I can't swim. I'm not a fisherman. I can't swim. I am not getting out of it. And so it actually identified each one of these guys saying, all right, here's probably what was going through his mind. Here's what was slowing him down. And not Peter. Peter, being a little impulsive, may have had some impulse control issues. Yeah, bails out of the boat in verse 39. So verse 30. So here, we've got Peter saying, okay, I got a word from Jesus to come. I trust him. I obey him. I'm going to go where he wants me to go. And so he jumps out of the boat. He's headed toward Jesus. He is walking on the water. And what happens? All of a sudden, he saw. I should have highlighted saw for you. I'm sorry. He saw that what? Because if I'm looking at Jesus, I know that I am well cared for. When I look at the storms, now I'm going to tell you a story I've told you 100 times, so forgive me. And I think this is incredibly insightful, incredibly powerful. Psalm 23, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. All right, this ties us together so well. Think, when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you have a choice. When you are walking through the valley of the shadow, it's a terribly, go home, Google it. I think they call it today the deep dark valley, that canyon where they believe David herded his sheep through there. And what happens is the sun is directly here. And so when you're moving your sheep, the sun behind you elongates a shadow in front of you, and an elongated shadow can strike fear in your heart. You're not looking at the authentic threat. All you see is the effect. You see this elongated shadow, and all of a sudden, what is that? Well, it strikes fear in your heart when all of a sudden you recognize, I don't know what this is, but it's big, and I don't know what this is, but it's threatening. I don't know what it is, but I can't handle it. And so we have a choice. When we are traveling through the valley of the shadow of death, we can look at the shadow, or we can turn and look at the sun. And in the sun, as long as we keep our eyes on the sun, Peter was able to walk on the water. The moment he took his eyes off of the sun, he began to sink. All this, the direction of your looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of my faith. The moment I take my eyes off of Jesus, fear now has the authority to rule in my heart. As long as I'm looking at Jesus, now I'm dealing with faith, because faith is built on who he is. That has very little to do with me. My job is just to get to know him. And so when I'm looking at Jesus, all of a sudden my faith grows because it's built on who he is. But when I look at the shadows, now I'm letting fear rule. And fear will grow. You ever notice that, you ever face a threatening situation? You ever notice you're waiting on a doctor, you're waiting on a court hearing, you're waiting on whatever you're waiting on, and in your mind you play all these scenarios. And your scenarios get uglier and uglier, your scenarios in your mind get darker and darker, and the shadows just keep getting more and more elongated. And have you ever actually had conversations in your head that didn't actually take place? Where in my head I'm like, oh man, this person's going to say this, and I'm going to say this, and then this is going to happen, and oh man, I said something stupid in my head. And so, so it's like in your mind, you have this whole conversation and this whole scenario is playing out because I am looking at the shadow, I'm not looking at the sun. Yeah. Welcome to the deep end of the pool, folks. Yeah, turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim. All right, one more verse, verse 30. And when he saw the strong winds and waves, he was terrified and began to sing, Lord, save me. So listen, when you focus on Jesus, your faith will rise. Why? Because this is instilled in the person of who he is. If you focus on the circumstances, the fear will rise. Next time you are encountering something that is fearful, you encounter something out of your control, something that's threatening, ask yourself, am I focusing on Jesus or am I focusing on the circumstance? I made a note, the storm didn't change, Peter's focus did. The storm was still going on, right? And so I highlighted this for you. I hope you hang on to that. What you focus on determines whether you walk or sink. Yeah, guess how I know that? Yeah, done some sinking in my time. Yeah, maybe that should have been the title of my sermon. Yeah, done some sinking in my time. Why? I got so busy looking at the problems, I got so busy complaining, and I got so busy taking my eyes off of Christ that I done some sinking. And what? Lord save me. All of a sudden, I choose, by the way, this is a choice, I choose to put my eyes back on the Savior. And when I do that, everything changes, right?